War has shaped the very course of human history, a constant, brutal force forging empires and bringing them to ruin. But amidst the grand narratives of conquest and glory, there are moments so savage, so utterly terrifying, that their echoes haunt us to this very day. These are not tales of heroism, but stark reminders of humanity's darkest capabilities. These are history's most savage war moments. Let's travel back to 216 BC. The Roman Republic, the titan of the Mediterranean, was at the peak of its power. Its legions were the most disciplined, most feared fighting force the world had ever seen. When they marched to face the Carthaginian general Hannibal the Canny, they did so with unbreakable confidence. They outnumbered his forces. They were fighting on home soil, and they were Roman. Defeat was simply not in their vocabulary. They never saw the trap. Hannibal, a military genius whose name would become synonymous with tactical brilliance, had a plan. He deliberately placed his weaker troops in the center of his formation, knowing they would buckle under the relentless Roman advance. It was a feint, a calculated retreat. As the Romans surged forward, convinced victory was at hand, Hannibal's elite African infantry, positioned on the flanks, held their ground. They didn't break. Instead, they wheeled inward, like two great closing doors. At the same time, Hannibal's cavalry, having already routed their Roman counterparts, circled around and slammed into the Roman rear. The trap was sprung. Over 70,000 Roman soldiers were suddenly encircled, packed so tightly they could barely lift their arms to swing a sword. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a methodical, industrial-scale slaughter. The air filled with the screams of dying men, the clash of steel, and the sickening thud of blade hitting bone. Blood soaked the battlefield, turning the dusty plains of Cannae into a crimson marsh. Entire legions, the pride of Rome, were wiped out in a matter of hours. When the sun set, the field was silent, littered with a mountain of bodies. Cannae stands as one of the deadliest single days of combat ever fought, a chilling testament to Hannibal's genius and the horrifying efficiency of ancient warfare. Rome would recover, but the ghost of Cannae would haunt its psyche forever. Now, let's move forward several centuries to the era of the Vikings, from the 8th to the 11th century. For coastal communities across Europe, from England to Russia, the sight of a longship, a dragon-headed prow cutting through the morning mist, was a vision of pure terror. There were no declarations of war, no formal armies marching, just sudden, shocking violence. Without any warning, Viking raiders would descend upon unsuspecting towns and monasteries. They struck fast and hard, their terrifying battle axes cleaving through shields and helmets with brutal force. They came not to conquer land, but to plunder wealth and instill fear. Villages were put to the torch, their wooden buildings burning like funeral pyres against the sky. Families who had lived peacefully for generations were mercilessly slaughtered in their own homes. Those who weren't killed on the spot faced a fate perhaps even worse, being shackled, dragged back to the longship, and sold into a life of slavery in a foreign land. The psychological impact was immense. Fear spread across Europe like wildfire. People prayed for deliverance, not from famine or plague, but from the fury of the Northmen. These raids weren't just acts of war. They were a form of psychological terror that paralyzed a continent for centuries. Our journey now takes us to the year 1258, to the magnificent city of Baghdad. As the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad was the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. It was a beacon of civilization, the world's center for science, philosophy, and art. Its house of wisdom contained the largest collection of books on earth. Then, the Mongol army arrived. Led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols were a force of nature, an unstoppable tide of destruction. They demanded the city's surrender. The Caliph refused, a fatal miscalculation. After a brief siege, the Mongols breached the walls. What happened next was an act of cultural and human annihilation. They unleashed a wave of destruction so complete, it's hard to comprehend. For weeks, the Mongols rampaged through the city, killing indiscriminately. Estimates suggest over 200,000 people, and perhaps many more, were massacred. Palaces, mosques, and hospitals were burned to the ground. The great House of Wisdom, with its priceless collection of knowledge from across the known world, was utterly destroyed. Its books were thrown into the Tigris River, It is said the river ran black with the ink of countless manuscripts for days, and then red with the blood of the city's slaughtered inhabitants. The siege of Baghdad didn't just end a city, it ended an era, a cataclysm from which the Islamic world would take centuries to recover. Finally, we arrive in the 20th century, during the Second World War. The Battle of This was not a battle of tactics or grand maneuvers. It was a meat grinder. When Hitler's Sixth Army pushed into the city named after his nemesis, they expected a quick victory. Instead, they were dragged into a hellish, 6-month struggle for every building, every room, every pile of rubble. Soldiers on both sides froze in the brutal Russian winter. They starved as supply lines were cut, and they fought with a primal ferocity. House to house, hand to hand, snipers became kings, turning the ruined cityscape into a deadly hunting ground. Life expectancy for a new soldier arriving at the front was measured in hours. The fighting was so close and personal. It was called Rettenkrieg, the Rat War, with over 2 million casualties. Stalingrad remains the single deadliest battle in human history. The sheer scale of the suffering and death is almost unimaginable. It was the turning point of the war on the Eastern Front, but it came at a cost that stains the conscience of humanity. These moments, Gani, the Viking raids, Baghdad, Stalingrad are not just footnotes in history books. They are brutal, visceral reminders that war is not about glory or honor. It is about survival. It is about the absolute worst that human beings can do to one another. Understanding these dark chapters is essential, not to glorify them, but to remember the true cost of conflict and strive for a world where such savagery is never repeated. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history's darkest moments. If you want to uncover more of the untold stories of conflict and courage, be sure to subscribe to Warlords and Battles. We'll see you on the next battlefield.